Hello everyone, for those of you that don't know, my name's Finn and this is my journey towards a life closer to boat building and sailing. So I've been working on a couple of different projects on the boat over the last couple of weeks. Now starting with the starboard side pilot berth here, we've been working on building all of the framework to house the starboard side fuel tank. So getting all the framework built and installed, enabling me to then get on and make the 3D template for the tank, so I know that I can manoeuvre it in and out of this pilot berth to be able to get it installed. One of the next jobs is to get the wet exhaust system fitted in the aft end of the portside pilot berth, and we're also going to make a start on fiberglass in the cockpit. But firstly, I just want to say there's going to be a slight difference with this video, and hopefully a very noticeable difference, as we're going to be having a friend of mine, Isabel, who is going to be taking over the editing from now on, reducing my stress levels on the amount of time that I have to spend working and editing on each episode. So thank you, Izzy. This is going to enable me to be able to put more hours into working on the boat, to be able to generate more content, to hopefully get the videos uploaded more frequently. For any of you guys who would like to check out some of the content that Isabel works on, then head to the description and you can find the link. Let's make a start on the starboard side pilot berth fuel tank framing. Alright, so I'm currently sitting down in the starboard side pilot berth, and in the position where I'm currently sitting is where the starboard side fuel tank is going to be installed. So before I can give Uplands the go-ahead on making this fuel tank, I of course first need to make all of the structure, which is going to be a wooden framework for the fuel tank to sit down onto. That's just giving it good support on all faces. That way then the tank isn't ever going to belly and it's not going to be able to move about, and then from that point I can then get the straps on, or the fixing plates bolted to the timbers either side. So in order for me to be able to make a plywood template, which is going to be a 3D wooden template of this exact size tank that is going to be made to drop in here, so I know that I'm able to get it in and out of the space that we've already got here. So what I've got to do is make two plywood bulkheads. One's going to be fitted at the aft and another one fitted at the forward face up against this beam. Now when I bought the boat, the port side fuel tank was already made and all the framework was already built and installed in that pilot berth on the port side. So here on the starboard side I'm just going to replicate that framework, although this tank is going to be slightly smaller than the one on the port side, as we've also got extra space in this pilot berth where our starter batteries are going to be, and maybe some other components for running the engine. So this tank is going to be slightly smaller, so it'll be more like the reserve tank, just a secondary tank. So once I've got the two plywood bulkheads fitted, I've then got to put a couple beams in on the inboard and outboard face of this framework, and that way it ties all the top of the tank, which is going to be a triangular shaped tank. So once that's all sitting down, that'll all be flush with the top of the timbers, and then I'll be able to build the pilot berth on top of all that. So the first job is to cut some plywood templates that are going to be slightly undersized than what I need, and that way I'm able to use my dummy stick to mark round and scribe all of the edges of where this template is going to be fitted, so I get a nice tight fit. So first up, let's get these templates made. I'm back in the pilot berth in the starboard side of the boat, and I've got the 4.5 bulkheads epoxied and screwed down here into place. So now that's all set, it's time to start fitting the framework that is going to be used to support all the way around the tank. So starting with this top beam, which is on the outboard edge of this pilot berth. Now these are just going to have some half lap joints pocketed into the beams here, fore and aft. So that then will sit down flush with the top of these beams down into the socket here, creating a nice rigid beam for this outboard edge of the fuel tank to sit against. So I've just got to mark out for the pockets that have got to be cut into these beams. So I'm just going to transfer the measurements of this half lap joint onto the beam, and then I can cut away the pockets, enabling me to slot this timber down into place. Alright, so I've just finished making this 3D template for the starboard side fuel tank that's going to be located down in the bottom of the pilot berth. Now annoyingly, I forgot to hit record when it came to gluing all of these components all together, but you can see what the idea was, and that is to create a complete 3D plywood template that fits snug into the framework that I've built down in the starboard side pilot berth, to allow for this tank to drop nice and easily down onto its bearers, and then I'm able to drop the outboard beam in that is going to support the side of the tank, stopping it from having any way of moving. So I'm just going to take this up onto the boat for a test fit, and just to make sure that it can fit through the opening into the pilot berth and then drop nicely down into the space. So as long as that fits nice and easily, the next step is to take this down to Uplands, who made the water tanks, and then give them the go ahead to get this tank fabricated. Alright, so it's now time to finish installing the last of the components for the wet exhaust system. Now some of you may remember in one of the previous videos I've already installed the exhaust hose off the heat exchanger from the back of the engine, and that runs down into the water lock that is fitted about 300mm below the aft end of the engine, back in the engine bay here. And then I've got the next section of exhaust hose connected onto the water lock, and that then runs through the two bulkheads underneath the cockpit floor, running round into this port side pilot berth here. And the next job is to fit this bespoke stainless steel gooseneck that I've had made up by Uplands, which is the same company that made the stainless steel water tanks for the boat. Now I went with having a bespoke gooseneck made up as the space that I've got to work with inside the portside pilot berth isn't that big. Now many of the off-the-shelf goosenecks you can buy, now Vitus do quite a range of them. Now they're all made from plastic and they're all quite large bulky parts, so to try and fit one of these into the pilot berth that I've got to get this exhaust run through, it would have been a bit of a challenge, just with the height of deck space down to the waterline that I've got. So to have a slightly shallower U-bend made up of some good quality marine grade stainless steel, this is going to enable me to fit it tight up to the bulkhead and just below the height of the deck, and then from there my exiting exhaust hose will then run from there out the side of the boat about 200mm above the waterline. So my first job is to drill another very large hole into the side of the boat here to enable me to fit this bronze skin fitting, which is going to be used for the outlet of my wet exhaust. So using the holes here that have already been drilled for the aft chain plates, I can then measure forward up to the next rib that is forward of those chain plate holes, and make sure that when I drill my hole I'm not going to come through and foul on any of the rebar that is set inside the boat. So it's time to get it all marked out, and I'll get set up with my drill and we'll have a go at drilling the biggest hole in the boat yet. Wish me luck. Some of you guys noticed in some of my previous videos where I was fitting the bronze raw water inlet and the two aft cockpit drain skin fittings. Some of you noticed that I hadn't filmed and showed you guys how I sealed the ferro cement of the hull before I then bedded the skin fitting down onto it. So on both occasions I had forgotten to press record on the camera to film when I was painting the ferro cement with the epoxy and letting that cure before I then bedded on the skin fittings to the hull. So I'm just using some more of the mass epoxy that I got from Pete, who came and did all the fiberglassing on the counter stern back last year. Now I've mixed up a neat mix of this epoxy, and I'm just going to give a generous coat to the whole area around where the skin fitting is going to be bedded, and that way I know that the epoxy is going to seal the hull from any penetrating water that might be able to find its way and soak into the concrete. So I've given this a good mix, so it's just a case of using a brush and applying it direct to the hull. Now before I apply this, I have already given the whole area a good clean up and given it a bit of a sanding to key off the area, and hoovered it all up and then wiped around with acetone just to remove any oils or anything that might be left on the surface, giving the surface a nice clean area to allow this epoxy to soak into. last parts of the wet exhaust system fitted. So we've got the exhaust hose coming through the bulkhead of the side of the cockpit here at the bottom, and then that hose runs up into the custom gooseneck that we've had made by Uplands. Now, some of you beady-eyed folk will notice that I have only used some high torque Jubilee clips on fitting this hose to the U-bend and to the skin fitting. Now, this is just for a temporary fit, as I'm still waiting for the exhaust clamps to arrive. So all I've done here is just clamp it on so I can get all the hose cut to size and connected, get it all fitted. So there we have it. I haven't fully seated the hose tail onto the skin fitting either yet. That will get bedded onto there with some thread seal, and I still need to give the skin fitting final torque down, just to compress down on the Sikaflex gasket that's on the outside of the hull, and just to squeeze it up on the inside. But that's it, that's the last parts for the exhaust system fitted to the boat. Alright, so one of the next jobs on my long to-do list is to get the cockpit fiberglassed. Now, in order to do this, I've got to run a fillet of epoxy that's thickened with some colloidal silica around all of the corners, just to give it a slight round over, so when I come to lay the matting, I'm not trying to fight with the matting, trying to wedge it right down into a sharp corner. Having a shallow round over means the matting is just going to lay out nice and evenly, and I'll be able to work the resin through the cloth. And the other thing I've got to do is just set the router up and run a ball nose round over just on this forward edge of the cockpit here where I fitted the new bulkhead. That is for the same reason again, just to allow the matting to lay over a rounded curve rather than having to go over a sharp corner. So before I do any of that, I'm just going to give the whole area a good sand up with 80 grit to allow the resin to really soak into that surface layer of wood. Alright, so it's time to start fiberglassing the new cockpit floor and the forward panel into the rest of the boat. When I removed all of the old boards that were fitted flush with the deck, probably fitted by the previous owner, all of these existing side bulkheads of the cockpit here were already fiberglassed down into the boat, and the aft section was already all glassed in as well. So when I've laid my new floor and my front section, that's all been bedded in with epoxy. So now all I've got to do is cut my matting to size, and I'm going to make a start firstly with this forward section, as it's probably going to be the more awkward one. So I've ground the top of this section slightly lower than the existing deck, so this way as I wrap the fiberglass up and over, I can work it into that lower section, and it's got a nice little round over on the other side to allow the fiberglass matting to roll over, and then that way when it's all set I'll be able to fare it off back to the level of the existing deck that's here. So I'm just going to lay my matting out here on the deck and cut it to size with it hanging down off of this panel, down just so there's a slight overhang onto the cockpit floor, and then I'll trim that off, and then I can make a start on mixing up some epoxy to give it all a good thick layer of neat epoxy to then allow me to lay my mat on, and then just coat it up with another thick layer of epoxy, and then I can start working that resin into the cloth. So first up, I'm going to cut this piece of fiberglass matting to the correct size for this forward section. So that's the forward face of the cockpit fiberglassed. and I left that overnight to fully cure off. Now that's all set nice and solid, so the next job is to mix up some more neat epoxy and give the cockpit floor another thick coating. Then I can lay out the next section of fiberglass matting, and then make up another mix of some epoxy and make a start working that epoxy through the cloth. Once that's been done, I can then go around all of my corners with some fiberglass tape, get all that epoxied in as well, and then that way that's sealing off all of the edges and all of the corners with a good coat of resin and fiberglass. So firstly, I'm just going to lay the glass out on the floor and get it cut to size, ready for the epoxy. So that's the glassing done on the base of the cockpit floor, but annoyingly, as I mixed up all of the epoxy to start glassing this in, I forgot to reposition the camera, so I didn't actually catch any of me doing the fiberglassing on the base here. But same principle as before, on doing it on the forward face, wetting out the full surface, laying the matting down, pouring more neat epoxy onto that, and this time I just used a squeegee to work the epoxy around, using quite a bit of pressure onto this to really work that epoxy through the cloth. So now all that epoxy has gone off and set nice and hard. It's just time to cut out the excess fiberglass where it's run over the hatches and the cockpit drains. Let's get this excess cut out. So there we have it. That is the majority of the cockpit fiberglassed. The only thing left for me to do now is to run some fiberglass tape around all of the joints, just to finish off all of the epoxy in and to get it all nice and rigid. Once that's all then done, I'll be able to make a start on machining up some of the timber that I'm going to be using to lay a floor and to clad all of the sides of the cockpit. It also feels really good to have the full wet exhaust system fitted into the boat, although it's only temporarily fitted with Jubilee clips, as I'm still waiting on the high torque exhaust clamps to arrive, and also to get the starboard side pilot berth, fuel tank, framework all built and fitted down into the boat, and then enabling me to get on and make the 3D template of the starboard side fuel tank. I can then deliver that to Uplands and give them a go ahead on getting that tank fabricated. But unfortunately, that's all I've got time for in this video. So if you've enjoyed watching the progress up to this point, please be sure to hit the like button on the video, and if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button and the little bell beside it to get notified of my next release. So I just want to take this time to say a massive thanks to all of you guys that support the project, either via Patreon or PayPal, or just liking, commenting and subscribing to the channel. Your generosity really is overwhelming, and I thank you all immensely. So if there is any of you that watch these videos that would like to find out how you can support the project, then head to the description below the video and I'll include all of the relevant links to do so. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.